Have you ever been ridiculed for wanting to learn something new? Have you ever felt the weight of being treated like a burden, just for trying to keep up with the world around you? I felt it. I felt it when I looked at my grandson with a shy smile and asked him to teach me how to use the computer. That's all. I didn't ask for an impossible favor, nor did I try to interfere in his life. I just wanted to understand how this device everyone uses worked. The one that opens doors, the one that brings people together. But the response I received was a loud, mocking laugh. He laughed in front of everyone and said, "You touched this, please. You can't even call." The room fell silent, but it wasn't a respectful silence. It was an awkward silence, the kind that weighs heavily, the kind that reveals how outdated we are. I gripped the edges of my chair tightly. I felt my face heat up. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just breathed, letting the weight of years of silence and forgotten value hang in the air. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? As if everything you've built, every tear, every dish served, every sleepless night had been erased. Stay with me until the end, because what I discovered after that moment made me see everything through different eyes. And maybe it will help you rise from a similar place, too. I just wanted to talk to a friend from church who had gotten sick. She told me she was online, that she could send me photos of her granddaughter, of her recovery, but I didn't know how to open the email. I felt small, but not defeated. I knew there was still strength inside me, there was still dignity, and, above all, there was memory. I remembered when my grandson was little and afraid to sleep alone. Who would stay by his side? Me. I remembered when my daughter cried after being cheated on, and I dropped everything to take care of her. I remembered every meal cooked, every bill paid with difficulty. Every Sunday, I was the only one to sit at the already set table, and there, watching him laugh as if I were just a silly old woman. Something changed, not out of anger, but out of conscience. I realized in time to protect myself. I realized that if I wanted respect, it would have to be rebuilt from the inside out. Because dignity isn't asked for, it's shown. And it was in that moment, with tears still in my eyes, that I made a decision, a silent one. One that no one noticed the moment it was made, but one that would change everything. Because sometimes the most just revenge is the one born from our own overcoming. That same day, after everyone had left, I sat in front of the switched-off computer. The silence of the house seemed to speak to me. My hands were shaking, but I reached out and touched a button. The screen lit up, and in that instant, I stood there, watching that new world open up before me. So many windows, so many buttons, so many possibilities. And for a second, I was scared. But stronger than the fear was the desire to prove not to others, but to myself that there is still room for me in this time that flies by so quickly. And if you, who are listening to me now, have ever felt something similar, if you've ever been diminished for wanting to learn, if you've ever been looked at as if you were a hindrance just because you have wrinkles on your face, tell me in the comments. I'll read each one with care. Sometimes, sharing your pain is the first step to transforming silence into strength. If any part of this story revolted you, touched you, or reminded you of someone who deserved more respect, leave a like. It's not just a button. It's your way of saying, I understand, I care too. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories that carry pain, but also resilience, subscribe to the channel. Because each new person here is a seed of dignity planted in a world that insists on forgetting the value of those who have lived so long. But that night, there in front of that screen, alone, with my heart still heavy, I did something no one expected. The lit screen before me felt like an entire universe, but also a reflection of the emptiness I'd been feeling for a long time. An emptiness no one sees, but that screams from within. It was just a computer, yes. But for me, it meant something much greater. It meant belonging. It meant proving to myself that I was still capable of learning, of growing, of living despite the stares that pushed me to the corner of the room, as if I'd become part of the furniture. My name is Louise. I'm 78 years old. I lost my husband 8 years ago. Since then, I've filled my days with silence, rehashed recipes, and the few calls I still get from my children when they remember. I'm part of the local church. I help with church festivals. I care for some older women because yes, some people still call me strong. But no one asks me what I want to learn. No one asks me what I dream. I've always wanted to write my memoirs, not to become famous, nor to show off, but because I believe that every life truly lived has something to leave behind. Stories that don't fit in photo albums or Sunday conversations. Things I've lived, felt, kept quiet about, and that only now have I realized deserve to be recorded. That's why I wanted to learn how to use a computer, so I could type up these memories, keep them safe, maybe even send them to my friend Ruth, who's living with her daughter and also keeps saying that no one has the patience to listen anymore. "You still want to learn that now?" was what I heard from one of my sons when I commented. "You'll waste your time," my daughter-in-law said, laughing. But the worst part was what came from my grandson. He grew up with me around, me helping care for him while his mother worked. I bathed him, told him stories, and prayed for him so many times I lost count. And it was he who uttered the phrase that still echoes in my heart. "You use a computer. You don't even know what a mouse is." It wasn't the phrase itself, it was the way he said it. His tone was dismissive, as if I'd made an absurd request. And it was then that I understood a hidden truth no one speaks aloud. Growing old, for many people, is the same as ceasing to exist. We become a backdrop, someone who serves, who listens, who holds the family together. But when they want something, for themselves, they become the butt of jokes that pierced me like a knife. But at the same time, it ignited something, because if there's one thing age has taught me, it's that it's only worth pursuing what truly touches our hearts. And somehow, that simple desire, learning to type, opening an email, sending a text, became my silent flag. Not out of vanity, but out of self-righteousness. It was my way of resisting, of affirming that I was still here, that my story is still being written, that my voice hasn't been lost to time. And that's why, that Sunday, after everyone had left, I sat down in front of the screen again. My fingers were shaking, yes. But there was a strength behind that gesture. A strength that came not just from anger, but from the decision to change, to do things differently, to no longer accept the role of someone who simply watches life pass by through the window. It was as if each click was a step out of the silence, as if each new lesson was a spark reigniting something that had been extinguished. I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted the right to try. No laughter, no judgment, no contempt. If you read this far, write the word in the comments, courage, because sometimes that's all we need to start over. Humiliation, when it comes from the mouth of someone we love, has a different flavor. It's not just pain, it's something deeper, scratching at us and remaining there, like an echo we can't silence. When my grandson said, laughing, that I didn't even know how to turn on the computer, and that if I tried, I'd only ruin it, his laughter hurt more than any words. It was as if I'd made a mistake just for wanting to learn, as if the mere act of trying automatically made me ridiculous. In front of the entire family, he exposed me as if it were funny. But no one laughed with me, everyone laughed at him. I sat alone, feeling as if something inside me had just snapped. I pretended not to care. I smiled, lowered my eyes, and said something like, "Yeah, maybe that's true." But inside me, at that moment, something cracked. It wasn't just pride. It was something more intimate. The feeling of no longer belonging to my own family. That feeling that, no matter how much I'd helped raise that boy, no matter how much I'd put food on the table, bathed him, told him stories, none of it was remembered. Because now, I was just the old lady in the corner, the one who doesn't know how to turn on the computer, the one who will ruin everything if you try. It's hard to explain what we feel in those moments, because it's not anger, exactly. It's a mixture of sadness, disappointment, and a painful emptiness. You start to wonder if you're truly becoming useless, if maybe you should just stop trying. Accept this role of a supporting character in your own home. But at the same time, there's something inside that won't let go. A small but persistent flame that refuses to go out. And it was this flame that made me get up from my chair that night and go to my room alone. I locked myself in silence and cried, not because of what he said, but because of what I allowed myself to feel. But you know, when the pain is too great, it begins to transform into something different, into resolve, into strength, into a change of mindset. The shame I felt in that room slowly transformed into a silent conviction. I wasn't going to give up on myself, not because of his laughter, nor the contempt of others. I was going to learn, even if it was alone, even if it took months. Because what was at stake wasn't just a keyboard, a screen, or an email. What was at stake was my dignity. In the days that followed, I began to observe. I watched every move he made on the computer. I feigned disinterest, but I took mental notes. I noticed how he turned it on, where he clicked, what he did with the mouse. I waited for everyone to leave one day and went into the living room. I sat in front of the computer, my heart racing, my hands trembled, but there, alone, I took a deep breath and pressed the button. The screen lit up, and even though I didn't know exactly what to do, I felt a pride I hadn't felt in a long time. That was the beginning of a journey. A silent transformation, because when we decide to respect ourselves, even after being hurt, everything around us begins to reassemble itself. Not overnight, but little by little, like someone stitching their own pieces together with a thread of time and the needle of courage. Every attempt, every mistake, every wrong button, it was all part of something bigger. The reconstruction of what I knew still existed within me. And in that new routine, between attempts and memories, I began to realize a truth no one had told me before. If you've read this far, leave a comment. Dignity, because sometimes it's all we want to keep, even when everything tries to take it away from us. That night, after I managed to turn on my computer for the first time, I got up more slowly than usual. It wasn't fatigue. It was as if my entire body was absorbing the weight of that small victory. Because, yes, for me, it was a victory. I looked in the mirror before bed and noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. My eyes were alive, and in the days that followed, that flame grew, silent but steady. I began to remember everything I'd faced. The nights turning laundry by hand to get everything ready for my children. The days with no money, but enough courage to invent recipes to support everyone. I remembered the first time I saw my husband cry when he lost his job, and how I was the one who held everything together until things got better. I remembered when Tyler, still a baby, had a high fever and slept in my lap while I prayed quietly, asking God not to let him go. All of this surfaced not as sorrow, but as forgotten strength. As if each memory brought a silent reminder, you've overcome much greater things. That's when I understood that strength doesn't fade with time. It only hides in silence when no one recognizes it. And sometimes, all it needs is a decision. Mine came without announcement, without scandal, without speech. It just came. I woke up one day, made myself a strong coffee, sat in front of the computer, opened a notebook, and wrote at the top of the page, "I will learn." And that was the beginning of my true transformation. I had no one by my side. I had no tutorials, no other people's patience, no encouragement, but I had time. And more than that, I had desire. Every wrong click made me laugh at myself. Every frozen screen was a new mystery. Every small success, an intimate celebration. And in this process, I realized that learning isn't just about technology, it's about freedom, about breaking free from dependency, about reconnecting with the world. That my mindset began to shift. I stopped seeing myself as someone who was getting in the way of others and started seeing myself as someone who also deserved space. And when this changes within us, everything around us starts to respond differently. Even the way you walk around the house changes. Your gaze changes. Your presence starts to take up space again. And this silent occupation of one's own space has an impact no one teaches. We feel it. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were days when I thought about quitting. There were days when I cried alone because it all seemed too hard. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about emails or keyboard shortcuts. It was about reclaiming something I didn't even know I'd lost: my identity, my ability to make decisions for myself, my voice. And it was in this climate of rediscovery that I began writing my first memoirs. My fingers slow, but my soul racing. I wrote about my childhood on the farm, about my fear of the dark, about my first kiss hidden behind the church. I wrote about the birth of my children, about simple celebrations, about the pain I never told anyone. And there, in those words, I found myself again. If you read this far, write the word in the comments, decision, because sometimes that's what separates who we were from who we choose to be. Learning alone at home had its limits. I knew that. The computer screen might light up, but it was like opening the door to an unknown place where I was still groping in the dark. So one day, I put on my best blouse, grabbed my bag, and went to church with a purpose I kept to myself. I walked in, slowly, as if I didn't want to attract attention. But the pastor saw me and came over smiling. He was always kind, and I knew that there, perhaps, I would find what I needed, not just a computer, but someone patient and non-judgmental. He led me to the small back room, where the library was. There, among dusty shelves and old books, was a computer. It was simple, but it was working. And that, for me, was more than enough. I sat down, took a deep breath, and asked softly, "Can you just show me the basics? I promise I'll learn the rest." He smiled, as if he understands more than he's saying, and began showing me the essentials. Opening files, writing texts, saving what I typed, nothing more. He didn't ask why, and I didn't explain either. But between classes, I began to understand that this space, hidden and silent, would be my starting point. I went back there the next day, and the next too. Without fanfare, without telling anyone at home. They thought I was going to church like I always did, and they were right, in part. But I had a secret plan, a plan made of silence, strength, and typed pages. I began writing my memoirs with more determination. Some afternoons I cried as I typed. Others, I laughed to myself, remembering things I didn't even know still lived within me. It was as if each paragraph I wrote was a piece fitting into the puzzle of my own existence. And the most beautiful thing was that no one was telling me how to do it. It was just me, my story, and the freedom to be who I was. No filters, no corrections. I recorded a video too, yes, me, with my hair tied up, wearing my favorite floral outfit. I recorded it without intending to show it to anyone. It was more for myself, to capture that moment. I talked about the courage to start over, the pain of being ignored, and the power of silence. I've watched that video so many times since, not for the vanity of watching myself, but to remember the strength that emerges when we stop waiting for others' approval and decide to stand on our own 2 feet. I also did research. I learned how to use Google. I discovered how to create a document, how to save it to a flash drive, how to type faster. I began to write fluently, as if my hands knew what to do. And all this transformation happened without anyone at home knowing. It wasn't out of revenge. It was out of inner justice, out of self-respect, because not every overcoming challenge needs to be told out loud. Sometimes it's experienced in silence, but the impact is profound. Over time, I noticed something curious. The way people treated me began to change, without me saying a word. Perhaps because my posture changed, my gaze no longer asked permission. My silence was no longer submission. It was awareness. And those who carry awareness, carry presence. That presence that bothers those who never knew how to deal with their own guilt. A presence that, little by little, begins to occupy the space that always belonged to it. If you read this far, write the word in the comments, secret, because there are plans that we can only carry out when we learn to keep quiet and act. The living room was full. It was my grandson's birthday, and the house was filled with familiar voices, the smell of good food, and the typical buzz of family gatherings. I stood in the corner, watching. No one had any idea what I had prepared. I waited for the right moment, when everyone was calmer, seated, with their plates already half empty and their glasses half empty. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains, giving the room a golden hue, almost like something out of an old movie. That's when I excused myself. "Can I show you something I made?" My voice was low but firm. They looked at me in surprise, and some smiled, as if it were another one of my grandma ideas. But when the TV turned on and the video started, silence fell. The first image was an old photo, Tyler, as a little boy, in my lap, his face cake-smeared and a smile that filled the screen. Then, a sequence of moments from his childhood at the playground. At Christmas, cuddling me, receiving letters I lovingly wrote, no sound but the music, no speech but those images. The photos shifted smoothly, and between them, excerpts of letters I'd written over the years appeared, letters he'd never known existed. I read some aloud, calmly. "Dear Tyler, today you fell and cried a lot, but then you smiled again. It reminded me that we can cry, but we should never stop trying." The video continued like this, like a carpet being unrolled, revealing a journey of affection, care, and memories that might have been forgotten, but that I never let die inside me. The soundtrack was simple, a soft instrumental, almost like a whisper, but It seemed every note resonated directly with each person sitting there. And at the end, after the photos, the letters, and the choked smiles, the final message appeared, in white letters, on a black background, very simple. Never laugh at those who only want to learn. And there it remained, for a few seconds, unhurried, unexplained, because some truths don't need explaining, they just need to be felt. I looked around. No one moved. My daughter's eyes were full. One of my nephews was looking at me as if he were seeing something he'd never noticed before. But it was Tyler who touched me the most. He didn't say anything. He just lowered his head. For the first time since everything happened, he seemed truly present. Not distracted, not on autopilot, present. And in that silence between us, I felt something had shifted. Not between him and me, not yet, but within him. It was at that moment that I understood that the truth, when spoken with love, has the power to transform. The shame he felt wasn't punishment, it was awareness. And that's what wisdom brings. It doesn't shout, it doesn't accuse, it doesn't point fingers. It simply reveals, like a window suddenly opening and letting in air from a place that had been sealed for a long time. And even though I hadn't planned for tears or apologies, what happened next was beyond anything I'd expected, because sometimes, simply showing that we too have a story, that we too have memories, that we too feel, changes everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the old woman in the corner of the room anymore. I was part of the story they were remembering, and that, for me, was enough. But there was something more to come, something I myself hadn't anticipated. If you felt this truth too, write the word in the comments, respect, because that's what we deserve, even when the world forgets. And there, in the middle of that silent room, where for so many years my voice echoed only among recipes and ignored advice, for the first time I felt that something inside the house had changed. Not just in Tyler, but in everyone. There was a new kind of listening in the air, more attentive, more human, more present. And perhaps you, listening to me now, have experienced something similar. Perhaps you've carried that same silent pain, that longing to be seen beyond the wrinkles, the limitations, or what they call your place. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell us what bothered you most. Because when we share, the pain doesn't dissolve, it transforms. And if any part of this journey truly touched you, liking the video is a simple way to show that stories like mine matter, that they deserve to be heard, remembered, and shared. And if you feel this kind of content speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. It's your gesture that keeps this message going, that gives us the strength to continue telling stories that don't always get attention, but that carry a truth that many people need to hear. Because, deep down, we're all trying to be understood, and sometimes, it all starts with someone pressing play on a story that doesn't seem like it's yours, but which, deep down, reminds you of who you really are. I didn't expect anything more after that day. The video was supposed to be just a symbolic gesture, a way to show that I was still here, whole, lucid, and with so much to say. But, like so many things in life, the impact we make isn't solely in our hands. Someone recorded it on their cell phone, someone shared it, and without me knowing, those images began to circulate. At first, they reached a distant cousin who lives in another state. Then, a childhood friend called me, emotionally, saying she'd seen a beautiful video of a lady speaking from the heart. I smiled, unsure of what to say. Even I didn't know it would go so far. Within days, messages began arriving, from women who saw themselves in that scene, from grandmothers who cried watching, from young people who said it made them look at their own grandmothers more closely. I sat there, on the couch, the same as every day, reading each comment like someone receiving letters from a world I thought no longer saw me. But now I saw, and heard, and felt. It was as if someone had removed a blindfold from people's eyes, a hidden truth that suddenly no one could ignore. Some called me an inspiration. Others said it was all they needed to hear during that difficult week. One woman wrote, "My son laughed at my attempt to learn how to use my phone, but after seeing your video, he asked me to teach him." I read it with tears in my eyes. It was as if something born from my silence had gained a voice that wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us, women who have been silenced, underestimated, and left aside, but who carry within themselves a strength that the world has forgotten to value. That's when the local radio station approached me. I who had spent years being called only Tyler's grandma, was now invited to talk about transformation, mindset, and decisions. They asked me if I'd be willing to participate in a program about overcoming challenges in old age. I laughed to myself before answering, because deep down, I knew it wasn't about age. It was about courage. And I accepted. I walked over there, wearing my floral blue dress, the one I always wore on days when I wanted to feel alive. I entered the studio with my heart pounding. On the other side of the glass, the host greeted me respectfully, like someone who recognizes a story before even hearing it. And when the microphone opened, I spoke, calmly, truthfully. I spoke of the contempt, the humiliation, the silence, but I also spoke of the decision to learn, of the pastor who helped me, of the church room, and of the first text I managed to type with my own hands. As I spoke, it was as if each word wiped away some of the dust that time had deposited upon me. It was a new beginning, but it was also justice. Not the kind that exacts, punishes, or repays in kind. It was a different kind of justice, a silent law of return, understood only by those who have felt forgotten, those who have been discarded but chose to remain standing. It was as if the universe had seen me again, as if saying, "I remember you." When I left the radio station, some people on the street recognized me. "You're the one from the video, right?" they said with a smile. I smiled back, not because I wanted fame, but because, somehow, I had found my place in the world again. A place that had always been mine, but had been hidden for a time. And there, on the sidewalk, under the morning sun, I thought about how many other people could experience this same rebirth if they knew there was still time. There was always time. If this touched you in any way, write the word in the comments. Rebirth. Sometimes, it only takes one step to start over. The afternoon fell with a different silence that day. I walked slowly to the backyard, as if each step were a farewell to everything that had held me inside for so many years. The sky was painted orange, the wind gently stirred the dry leaves, and that old wooden bench awaited me in the same place, as always, next to the jasmine bush I planted when Tyler was born. I sat there carefully, as if knowing that moment would never return, and closed my eyes for a few seconds. There was no rush, just a peaceful emptiness, as if my soul had finally found a place to rest. For a long time, I accepted it silently, maybe out of fear, maybe out of habit. We grow up hearing that we have to be strong, that we have to understand, that we shouldn't get in the way, and, without realizing it, we keep quiet, first out of politeness, then for survival. But the silence accumulates, like fine dust in the corners of the soul. And when his laughter echoed that day, it wasn't the sound that hurt, it was the memory, it was everything that came with it. The years of giving, the sleepless nights, the knees bent in prayer, the notes in school snacks, the impromptu birthdays, filled with love. None of it fit into an impatient laugh. And in that moment, something broke. On that bench, my eyes fixed on the dirt floor, I felt a tear fall. But it wasn't of sadness, it was of relief. It was as if, finally, I'd given myself permission to feel, to remember, to understand. Because forgiveness, even if silent, begins within. And in that moment, I was ready to forgive myself for having accepted so little, for having hidden behind an image of strength that, in truth, was fear of breaking, for having thought time had already passed for me, when, in fact, it was only beginning. There was something sacred in that silence, something no words could explain. I remembered my mother, sitting on that same bench, hands sewing our clothes, whispering that a strong woman was one who knew how to keep quiet and carry on. And for years I believed that. But now, with my hands in my lap and my heart so much lighter, I realized that true strength is knowing when to be silent, and when to speak, when to accept, and when to stand up. Because sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply to keep going. Perhaps that's why that prayer I said silently was the truest of all. I asked for nothing. I complained about nothing. I simply gave thanks. Because, deep down, the greatest gift I received on that journey wasn't the recognition of others. It was the chance to rediscover myself, to hear my own voice again, the one that had been muffled for so many years, but never completely silenced. The voice of the woman who dreams, who feels, who still wants to learn. And it's curious how, even without words, we communicate. Tyler's gaze, ever since that day, carries something different. It's not guilt. It's not remorse. It's a kind of respect that only arises after the fall. As if he understood, even without me saying so, everything that happened inside. And that, in itself, is a miracle. A subtle, silent miracle. But one that transforms, a miracle that begins when we stop asking for permission to exist. That afternoon, under the golden light of the late afternoon, I understood that some battles don't need to be won with shouting. Sometimes, the greatest victory comes when we have the courage to sit in our own silence and truly listen to ourselves. And in that backyard, surrounded by memories and jasmine, I knew something inside me had changed forever. If this reminded you of some truth that you have kept for too long, write the word in the comments. Release. Sometimes our healing begins with what we can finally say, even if it's just to ourselves. That the transformation I've been experiencing isn't just mine. It reverberates in the small stories that unfold inside the church, in the kitchen hallway, in the sewing room, even away from the camera. Today, I teach other women how to use the computer. Some arrive still shy, with that look of someone who thinks there's no more to learn. Others, their pride already wounded by years of being voiceless, enter assertively, ready to forget their own worth. And it's there, amidst the clicks and awkward laughter, that I realized the true impact of what I began so unplanned so long ago. It's funny to think how digital knowledge has become a bridge instead of a barrier. I see them laughing as they slide their fingers across the touchscreen, overwhelmed with surprise. The video I secretly recorded helped in ways I can't even measure. And today, late this afternoon, I'm back in that church support room, helping format an email, showing how to save a photo, explaining how not to panic over a Windows error, unhurriedly with patience, with silent love and the mindset that a fresh start is always possible. Sometimes, a behind-the-scenes conversation fills my heart. One of them tells me she was so insecure that she shifted her chair before entering the room. Another says she was embarrassed to turn on her computer at home for fear of making a mistake. And when I reach out and calmly say, "You can do it," and she does, that's not just a keystroke. It's a victory over perceived weakness, a fresh start full of possibilities. This is the strength of a grandmother who, unintentionally, became an inspiration and a role model for empowerment. My grandson Tyler no longer calls me Old China, as he used to say sarcastically when he was a child. Now he comes to me with genuine questions. "Grandma, how do I write in bold? Grandma, look at this video I recorded. Can you teach me how to climb?" I smile that way. That comes from the soul, not out of pride, but out of recognition, realizing that hidden persona, the one she only knew how to serve, but didn't feel served, now walks hand in hand with the machine. And more than teaching, I'm rediscovering my role as a wise elder, not because of age, but because of the understanding that transformation has no timetable, that true leadership comes from sharing, not from showing off, that empathy is more powerful than a doctorate, and that emotional connection has a far more lasting impact than any technical tutorial. I realize, with ease, that my journey, which could have been one of solitude, has become a map for many women to know that it's never too late to be heard, to learn, to exist again. They're in that room that once hosted so many sermons and weekend bingo games. Something different now echoes, the laughter of people who have discovered they can do it, they can write, they can tell their story. And this, to me, represents a seed of change. Small, powerful symbol that wisdom and skill go hand in hand, that age brings a clarity of mind that youth often takes time to find. And so, with the afternoon light illuminating the windows, I understand that my role today is more than that of a grandmother or a survivor. I am a mentor of a silent revolution, a simple yet profound transformation. And as I watch fingers tremble on the mouse and smiles emerge where there was once fear, my heart fills with gratitude, because, deep down, this is it, knowing that touching a life even with a discreet click has the power to change everything. If this idea of wisdom in action makes you smile, write the word in the comments. Impact. When I look back, I don't see a story about computers, technology, or overcoming old age. I see a silent territory that, for a long time, no one dared to explore. The territory of hidden value behind wrinkles, of unheard wisdom, of unrecognized love. Everything I've experienced so far has brought me to this moment, not to prove anything to anyone, but to finally understand who I am when I'm not trying to fit anyone's expectations. Because, deep down, all I wanted was to participate, to feel included, to be part of their world, their topics, their tools. their conversations. And that's exactly what so many other people, like me, still wait in silence for, the chance to be seen with dignity. My story is just one among many. The difference is that, by a twist of fate or perhaps by a greater desire, it was told. Make no mistake, telling this story isn't just about me. It's about you too. It's about everyone who, at some point, has been labeled, underestimated, ignored. It's about those who swallowed their pain in silence, who smiled so as not to cause harm, who accepted the label of outdated just to keep the peace. But there comes a time when the silence starts to scream, and if we don't listen, it screams louder. That's what happened to me, and maybe it's happening to you now. What touched me most along the way wasn't the compliments or the invitations, not even the admiring glances. It was a woman who wrote to me saying, "Louise, I thought my life was over. Now I see it was just waiting for a new beginning." That struck a chord, because that's what moves me today, knowing that my experience can serve as a bridge for someone, and it doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes, just by someone feeling less alone, the impact is eternal. We live in times where so many people talk, but so few listen, where everyone wants to be right, but no one truly wants to understand the other. And I keep wondering, if Tyler had stopped for 5 minutes to listen to me, would everything have been different? Maybe, maybe not. But what I do know is that that moment, painful as it was, opened a portal to personal transformation, to a change of mindset, to a rediscovery of my own strength. Today, my age doesn't weigh me down, it anchors me. It gives me the peace of mind of knowing I don't need to chase approval, that I can walk in my own time and still leave deep marks, that there is power in patience, beauty in starting over, and truth in those who insist on existing, even when the world tries to erase them. And perhaps that's precisely where our greatest revolution lies, in the choice to continue, even after we've been interrupted. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes this journey. Maybe it reminded you of someone, maybe it reminded you of yourself, and if this video made you reflect, if any part of my story resonated in your heart, I invite you to write a word here in the comments, voice, because sometimes all we need to change the course of history is to allow ourselves to use our own voice. If you've stuck with me this far, perhaps it's because something in this story truly touched you, and if this kind of content speaks to what you believe, what you feel, then subscribe to the channel, because there's plenty of content along those same lines, with stories that carry meaning, reflection, and, most importantly, transformation. Leave your sentence here in the comments. This message was for me, just so I know you made it to the end, and that, somehow, we've walked this far together. And if this video did you good, if it brought back a memory, an insight, a new perspective, leave a like. Sometimes, a simple gesture like this helps this message reach more people who need to hear exactly what it is. There's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click on it and continue with me there. The conversation has just begun.